All right, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mr. Matthew Larson, and we are here today to talk about the book Small Things Like These. This is going to be an overview of the book. It's also going to be an overview of the author and the historical context surrounding the themes and the events that are taking place in this book. Now, this book is going to be published in October of 2021, and it's going to win the Orwell Prize for Political Fiction. Now, this is a prize by the George Orwell's Foundation, which is going to writers who embody the same mentality and themes that he embodied in his writing. So again, George Orwell, probably most famous for his work 1984, that political dystopian literature. His foundation awards the prize for those who write in a similar kind of style in terms of today's climate. This book is also going to be made into a film in 2024. However, this presentation is going to focus solely on the text of the book. Now, the author of the book is Claire Keegan. Claire Keegan is an Irish writer from County Wicklow. So she's going to be raised on a 53-acre farm in Wicklow. That farm's actually not going to have running water until the age of 6. So she comes from a rural background. She's particularly fond of horses and has worked with horses really her entire life. And you're going to see some themes of that kind of coming into her writing, that rural country upbringing. She's also going to ultimately study political science and English in the United States. So at the age of 17, she's actually going to leave Ireland to go off to school. She's going to study English, which is a very common trait for a writer to study, and also political science, which is something that's going to see particularly in this book. So you look at someone who's won the Orwell Prize for Political Literature, probably someone who's had an understanding of politics, and that is something that certainly is the case with Claire Keegan. All right, now let's look at the actual text of the book. The actual text of the book takes place in New Ross, County Wexford. Historically, this is going to be the town President John F. Kennedy's family arrives from, so just a cool little tidbit about the town. You can look into the town a little bit more if you would like. However, it's not going to be that prevalent for the actual text, just where it takes place, and it's going to take place in the mid-1980s, around the time of Christmas. There is some discussion out there whether or not this is a Christmas text or if this is just a book that happens to take place around Christmas. There are going to be some of those themes that are going to come out in the text. Ultimately, it's up to you to decide when you read the book if it is a Christmas book or if it's not. The main character of the book is a man by the name of Bill Furlong. Bill Furlong is a coal merchant. That's going to be crucial in terms of the entire story because the conflict that happens is a direct result of his role as a coal merchant. He's also a very devoted father, and you're going to see a lot of instances of that throughout the text, and he is a devout Catholic. Like many in Ireland at this time, he was a practicing Catholic, and that's going to lead to some tension and some inner conflict as we get through the book, and you will understand why once you read the text. Now, it's also important to understand the idea of a Magdalene Laundry. A Magdalene Laundry is also known as a Magdalene asylum, named after Mary Magdalene from the Bible, a woman who historically is believed to be a prostitute who then converted and was a follower of Jesus. A Magdalene Laundry is simply a place to care for, quote, fallen women. A fallen woman is those who, quote, fell from the grace of God. Historically, this tends to do with ideas of chastity. And it's important to understand this is not always consensual issues. So this could be instances of women who were raped, were otherwise abused, and they would be considered unchaste. It could be women who were in things such as prostitution. It could also be women who were just in a consensual relationship, but they were not married. They were going to be considered fallen because they had moved away from the will of God, and therefore need to find a way to get back. That's going to be the primary individuals who end up at Magdalene Laundries. However, there's also going to be a number of abandoned women who end up here too. Orphans, so those whose parents had died and they had nowhere else to go. Those who were abused in their family, so they were abused and they had to leave for some reason. Also, those who were considered outside the, quote, norm. So any individual who wasn't kind of conforming to what society wanted and their families felt like they couldn't deal with them would be sent off to these Magdalene Laundries. And the goal of the Magdalene Laundries was to help heal the women, to get them back up from their fall so that they can once again be in the grace of God. Unfortunately, that is not what always happens, and there was a massive scandal surrounding these in Ireland. So there's going to be 133 unmarked graves found at a Magdalene Laundry in Drumcondra, in a neighborhood in Dublin. It's going to be sold in 1993. There's going to be some extension work going on and renovation, and they find these graves. Now, the problem is there was more corpses discovered than there actually were deaths. It is a crime to not report a death that happens on your property, meaning something was being covered up. And this is going to lead to a massive, massive scandal, particularly because the government, the state of Ireland, was closely connected to these laundries. So there's a close connection between the church and the state, and no one really knows what was happening. Also is the isolation of these women. The women, these fallen women, so to say, who were in these Magdalene Laundries were completely isolated from the rest of society. So if anything was happening, there wasn't really a way for them to bring it out. Also is run by the church, so if they do come out, it's kind of that idea of who is society going to trust, the nuns, members of the church, or are they going to trust the individual woman who maybe has a bit of a past that is considered morally wrong within society. So there's a lot of isolation. There's also going to be a significant amount of sexual, physical, and psychological abuse that is going to be happening within these laundries. So again, there's this rampant the idea of rampant abuse of all forms happening inside these laundries. Again, the women are completely isolated from society, and the government is working and funding these. Now, the government's involvement is important to understand here. First and foremost, you want to understand that the original Irish Constitution that was passed, and I believe it was in 1938, stated the special position of the Catholic Church in Ireland. So the Catholic Church, there was not officially a state religion, so to speak, but there was a special recognition for the Roman Catholic Church. There was an acknowledgement of other faiths as well, but there was a special focus on the Roman Catholic Church. The government of Ireland originally, after its founding breakaway from the English, was closely tied to Roman Catholicism. Irish nationalism and Catholicism were closely tied really since the 1600s for a very long time. There was courts that came about, so legal courts that would send women away for different crimes. So women who were caught into prostitution or anything of that would be sent away, often to these laundries. And there was no check-in for their well-being. So the government would send them and force them to go to this individual place. However, they would kind of just abandon them at that point and not check back in. In 2001, so less than 10 years after the bodies were found, Drumcondra, the Irish government is going to formally admit that there were abuses that were happening in these laundries. However, they're going to maintain no culpability for the abuse. They're going to simply state that these were privately run organizations, that the government of Ireland is not responsible for what happened to these women. That was done by an individual. In 2013, there's going to be an inquiry into what happened right here. There's going to be a lot of interviews done by women who had gotten out of these later on because they kind of quit being a thing as time went on. And they're going to understand that there were significant levels of verbal abuse within these laundries. So virtually every laundry would have had some a significant level of verbal abuse. They also found that there was no consistent evidence of physical and sexual abuse. So they're stating that it did happen, however, it was not considered consistent. Now, there is some debate on how prevalent that was, and was that truly the case. This is the government's finding. Ultimately, in 2013, the Taoiseach, so the Prime Minister, is going to issue a formal apology and ultimately pay reparations to those women who were in those laundries. That is all for now. Citations right through here. Comments, questions, please do let me know. Otherwise, I will see you later. Good luck.